Imagine a girl who from childhood adored freedom, riding horses, walking in the woods, and dreaming of a simple life. And suddenly, at one moment, she is taken away to a huge palace, forced to wear heavy dresses, follow hundreds of rules, and forget about her desires. This was the fate of Elisabeth of Bavaria, or as she was called, Sissi. When she married Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, she was only 16 years old. It would seem that the dream of any girl, to become Empress, wear diamonds, and live in luxurious castles. But on her wedding day, Sissi wasn't smiling. She was crying. Her life no longer belonged to her. Now she had to obey strict palace etiquette under the watchful eyes of her mother-in-law and courtiers. She hated these rules. Sissi once confessed, "I am a prisoner in a golden cage." Palace life was torture for her, and her marriage was not a fairy tale but an obligation. She longed to escape, but where could the Empress go? But this was only the beginning of her tragic story. The further, the more terrible. Betrayals, loneliness, loss of children, and a shocking finale, which she was predicted even in her lifetime. After her wedding, Sissi moved to Vienna and faced something she could not even imagine. The court was not just strict, it was cold and cruel. Everything was decided not by her, but by her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophia. It was Sophia who set the rules, decided how the Empress should behave, and did not give Sissi the slightest chance to prove herself. Sissi could not dress as she wished, could not say what she thought, could not even eat when she wanted to. All meals were strictly scheduled, and she had to sit in complete silence at a huge table among the high courtiers. Any mistake she made was immediately debated. In 1855, Sissi had a daughter, little Sophia. It would seem that this is it. Happiness, she finally had something of her own. But the joy did not last long. Mother-in-law simply took the child and announced that the Empress is too young and inexperienced to bring up children. Sissi was not even allowed to care for her daughter herself. The nannies appointed by the Archduchess would not let her near the girl without permission. The pain of this blow was so severe that Sissi fell into depression. She stopped talking to people, began to avoid court events, and more often looked out the window, dreaming of escaping from the palace. In letters, she confessed, "I feel dead inside." With each passing year, her despair grew. She realized that to Vienna she was not an empress, but just a beautiful doll who should sit on the throne and smile. But she didn't feel like smiling. She couldn't influence politics or raise her children, or even just live the life she wanted to live. The princess fairy tale had turned into a terrifying reality. But even more cruel blows of fate awaited her ahead. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing not yourself, but a threat. The threat of old age, overweight, wrinkles, and you'd do anything to stop time. That's how Empress Sissi lived, a woman for whom youth and beauty became the meaning of life. She was one of the most beautiful women of her time, tall, slender, with long brown hair that reached her heels. Everyone admired her looks, but it was not enough for Sissi herself. She feared even the hint of age. To stay thin, she went to extremes. Sissi ate only oranges and drank veal broth. No bread, no meat, no desserts. Sometimes she fasted for days if she thought she had put on weight. Her waist was only 50 centimeters. To maintain this figure, she exercised several hours a day. Every day started with exercises on the gymnastic rings, and then she would go for long walks on horseback. But even that wasn't enough for her. Sissi spent hours in front of the mirror, brushing her famous hair. The process was so long that her hairdresser was fined if too much hair fell out during the combing. And Sissi herself suffered from migraines due to the heaviness of her hair, but never allowed it to be cut. She wore corsets so tight she could barely breathe. To keep her skin young, she made masks of raw meat and strawberry juice. Over the years, this fear only grew stronger. At the age of 40, Sissi made a shocking announcement. She would no longer allow artists to paint her portraits. She wanted the world to remember her as young and beautiful. But there was no escaping age. With each passing year, it seemed to her that she was losing her main value. But what happened next made her give up not only her beauty, but also her life in the palace. The Empress had it all: power, wealth, title. But instead of enjoying it, she wanted to escape, to get as far away as possible to a place where no one would recognize her or force her to live by someone else's rules. The more time she spent at the Austrian court, the more she felt like a prisoner. The duties of the Empress disgusted her, and the court bored her. She could not make important decisions, could not raise her children, could not even openly express her emotions. And she found the only way out for herself: escape. Sissi hardly ever lived in Austria. She so rarely appeared in Vienna that she was nicknamed the Invisible Empress. While her husband ran the empire, she traveled the world: Hungary, Italy, England, Switzerland, Greece. She lived on ships for long periods of time, preferring sea voyages to boring receptions. Her only solace she found in Hungary, where people treated her not as a cold Austrian empress, but as a living person. It was there that she felt some freedom. But even Hungary could not become a home for her. She continued to travel, as if looking for a place where she could feel happy. In time, she almost stopped talking to courtiers and courtiers. She was only interested in poets, philosophers, and scholars, those who could talk not about politics and etiquette, but about the meaning of life and the human soul. She read Homer in the original, admired ancient philosophers, and spent hours discussing poetry. She believed that only these people could understand her. To everyone else, she was a strange, obscure, withdrawn woman who avoided society and spoke in riddles. But even travel and books could not save her from herself. Eventually, her escape from reality ended in tragedy, a tragedy she herself had foreseen. On September 10th, 1898, Sissi was in Geneva. She hadn't been a real empress for a long time. She had given up palace life, hardly ever appeared in public, and traveled under an assumed name. That day, she was just walking along the quay, not attracting attention. But she was spotted by a man looking for someone to kill. Luigi Lucchini was an anarchist. He dreamed of destroying a member of the royal family to prove his hatred for the monarchy. But he didn't plan to kill Sissi. His goal was another person, the Prince of Orleans. However, at the last moment, plans changed. The prince did not appear, and Sissi was next to him. Lucchini stabbed her in the chest with a sharp awl. Immediately after the attack, Sissi walked for a few more minutes without realizing what had happened. Her corset was so tight that it was holding back the blood. She collapsed already on the ship that was to take her onward, on another journey. When they undressed her to examine her wound, everyone froze. There was no trace of blood on her body, just a tiny hole on her chest. Only when her dress was soaked did it become clear that the wound was fatal. A few minutes later, the Empress of Austria died. Sissi's death shocked Europe. But if it was a surprise to everyone, it was as if she herself had been waiting for this moment. In the last years of her life, she wore black all the time, talked about death, and avoided public places. She knew her life would end in tragedy. One day, an astrologer told her, "You will die by stabbing yourself in the heart." Perhaps he himself did not think his words would become reality. But Sissi was a woman who had felt tragedies approaching all her life. She believed in fate, believed in signs, and I think she really did know she was in for a terrible end. But even after she was gone, questions remained. Why did the prediction come true so accurately? Why did the killer choose her? And how did Sissi feel in her final moments? She once said, "I belong only to the wind." Perhaps that was her true destiny, to run forever until one day the wind would stop forever.